Hey friends, SGT here, and I couldn't be more excited to have Chris Martenson, author, researcher, and scientist who runs chrismartenson.com. Chris, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks. It's my pleasure to be here.
Hey, look, your scientific, analytical approach to research makes perfect sense given your PhD. Can you give everybody sort of a 30,000-foot view of the crash course?
Sure. It's my best attempt to make the case that we can't just look at the economy in isolation. We can't look at energy in isolation. We can't look at other resources that we get from the environment in isolation. We have to look at all three together, that we're at an incredible turning point in human history, not U.S. history. This is sort of a global phenomenon where we're about to make a really interesting transition, where humans are going to have to go from higher quality energy sources to lower quality energy sources. And energy is the foundational commodity by which every economic transaction occurs. If you don't have energy, you do not have an economy, period. So we hold that thought on one side, and then what the crash course does is say, okay, we know energy is really important to our economy and moving things around and transforming things. Okay, that's fine. Now what's going on over here in the economy itself? And there we have this story which says, look, the economy is founded on this thing we call debt-based money or fiat money. And there's just really one simple requirement of that money system. It has to perpetually expand. And not just linearly, but exponentially. I mean, it has to grow 3, 4, 5, 6% a year, year after year, forever. And my thesis that I put out in the crash course is this idea that not only is that impossible given the fact that energy can't grow infinitely forever, but that this breakdown, this tension that's building right now, that everybody, you read the newspapers, you open up any of the recent books on the economy, you turn on the news, you see this tension developing already, where for whatever reasons we're finding it really impossible to expand debt, and Europe's falling apart, and eventually the U.S. is going to run into the same difficulties. And for people who are just looking at it as an economic set of difficulties, are missing the most important part of this story, which is there's a reason we can't seem to get the economy off the ground, even with trillions of fresh, fiat funny money additions tossed in there. And that's because oil's at $100 a barrel or more on the world stage. And we've never had a recovery with oil prices at that height. And the price of oil is really just a proxy for the idea that it's getting harder to come by, at least the cheap and easy stuff. We're transitioning into harder, more expensive, more difficult to process, and frankly, lower net energy oil. And that's just where we happen to be in this story. So the crash course says maybe we should just look at that, try and leave our beliefs at the door, forget about which political party we love or which technology we happen to be enamored with, all of that. Let's just look at the data. What is it telling us? And it tells us that we are in the middle of an incredible process of adjustment. And, my view is that our debt-based money system is really very much imperiled at this point in time because the people who are pulling the strings on that system are, how do I put this? They're completely unaware of the physical realities of what $100 in oil is really telling them, what the signal is there, and what our proper responses to that should be. We're just trying the same old, preserve the status quo, print a little more, cross our fingers, hope growth takes off. It's not working, and they're very confused. So what the crash course does, hopefully, is it lifts that veil of confusion and says, look, here's a framework for understanding what's going on in the world today, and more importantly, where we're probably going in the future.
Well, Chris, let's talk a little bit about peak oil versus endless oil that some in the abiotic oil camp believe to be true. Now, I think personally that we've all been a little bit brainwashed since a young age by the big oil companies and those that own them, that oil comes from fossil fuels, biological material, and dead dinosaurs. And I just personally don't buy it, but I could be way off base. Correct me if I'm wrong. For my audience, much of whom believe that peak oil is a managed piece of propaganda by those who control oil, and by those who want to enslave humanity by restricting our ability to have affordable energy. How would you like to run with that?
Well, I'm going to have to completely counter it because as a scientist, I can tell you that the scientific evidence for the origin of oil is absolutely beyond dispute for me at this point. It's almost as if you're arguing here that fevers aren't caused by either bacteria or viruses and our body's response to it. I mean, we have so much evidence for where oil comes from. And by the way, you should really do yourself a favor and not say it's from dead dinosaurs, because nobody says that. It's actually from algae. It's from microscopic organisms, which, if you look at them under a microscope, they consist mostly of a membrane. What is a membrane? It's a long-chain hydrocarbon. What's a long-chain hydrocarbon? Well, it's a precursor to oil. It is an oily substance. These things developed, grew in shallow seas. They settled down to the bottom. They got capped over with various types of sedimentary and capstones, and then they got cooked for a little while under a few processes. And we have biological markers in this substance. We have radiological markers. We can date these things. There's just so much evidence for where and why and how we found oil. And you're also conflating two separate ideas here, which you should also back away from. The idea that it's either you believe in abiotic oil or you believe in peak oil, because those are actually separate concepts. Because you could have both abiotic oil and peak oil at the same time if it turned out that the formation mechanism by which abiotic oil was operating, if that's what you believe in, if that's too slow compared to our extraction rate of getting oil out of the ground, bingo, you have both peak oil and abiotic oil. So
Sure.
If we want to talk about the origin of oil, we can talk about the idea that the biological markers that happen to be in oil, I'm talking things like porphyrin ring structures, certain amino acids, different types of things that we only find associated with biological life, very complicated, complex molecules, which, by the way, the geological chemists actually look at to figure out which, to make sure that the oil that they're chasing actually came from the right strata that they're hoping to pull from, because we find this stuff in various geologic strata that conform to certain geologic ages, Cretaceous, Tertiary, Jurassic, Permian, all of that stuff, right? And I wish I could take you down with me next time I go. I've been to Midland, Texas twice, and they have their what's called the Oil Museum, and to me it's the Louvre of oil museums. It's extraordinary, and in one room they have this complete mock-up. It's like a two-story mock-up where they take every layer of stone in the Permian Basin. So the Midland, Texas, is in this Permian Basin. It's a big, giant geologic structure that was principally laid down in the Permian period, quite a while ago. And they show all these different layers of rock, maybe 70, right? And then all of a sudden, there's one layer of oil-bearing rock, maybe 60, 70 feet thick. And it's down there, I don't know, maybe 6, 8, 10,000 feet. And then, another 6,000 or 7,000 feet of rock under that, right? And that's where the oil is. It's in this one little spot, and that conformed to the period of time when that region happened to be a shallow sea. We know this from other records, right? There's fossils above it, there's fossils below it. We absolutely can date this strata, not just close, but it's like a 60 million year old formation. We can date this to within the nearest 10,000 years using a variety of radiological and stratification techniques, right? So we know exactly when this stuff got there. So here's a question for the abiotic folks. How'd that oil get there? If there's no oil below it and there's no oil above it and it just sits in this perfect little band, how did it get there? The abiotic debate, it really rests on some very, very thin evidence. I've never actually seen the core data itself. I've only read descriptions that I couldn't chase and source myself about a well that was drilled in Russia, very deep in allegedly a non-sedimentary rock structure. And it didn't gush, but there was some oil discovered there. So there's not, and against that, I can show you entire museums, reams of data, spectroscopic chemistry data, geologic data. I mean, it's just like all over the place, and it's all sort of interlocking and confirming. So it's often when I find people involved in the abiotic debate, they actually are not interested. Their eyes are even glazing over when I start using words like I just used, because what they're really saying with that is that they're holding a belief that big oil companies have manufactured a scam to gouge us on oil prices and maintain their power structure. So what they're doing is using something that confirms a belief they hold. And guess what? Beliefs are not amenable to data. You can't change them with data. That's why I've never yet had a data debate with an abiotic person, because I can't get that far. They get mad at me before we even get to the data. And my tip in life is when I'm talking to somebody and using facts, and they get angry, the emotion tells me that we're in belief territory.
That's right. And no, there's no anger here. We are on a quest for truth here, and that's why I'm just honored to have you on, because I do respect your scientific background, your opinion, the work you've done in this area. You've said that America and the modern world in general has been built on cheap energy. Are we looking at a new dark age in the United States when the energy crisis finally manifests itself? I think you've even said that we don't even have 10 good years left with this cheap oil.
Well, so another concept I want to tease apart is the idea of having an energy crisis versus what I'm calling for, which is a liquid fuels crisis. Now, 95% of everything that goes from point A to point B, I don't care if we're talking about the latest electronic Wizmos that get shipped out of Amazon and come on a UPS truck, or it's you taking a business trip somewhere, or it's food that comes in the dark of night on an 18-wheeler at the Safeway. Well, everything virtually moves because of liquid fuels, right? We move almost nothing with compressed natural gas or by electricity at this point in time, almost nothing. It's all coming on trucks or cars or planes, right? So what we're facing right now is a situation where we've always had access to more and more and more liquid fuels when we've wanted it. And every time our economy has expanded, we've used more liquid fuels. And that's just been the reality for hundreds of years. If you take our nation's total energy use from, say, 1650 through to current, and you look at it, it's been growing almost perfectly exponentially at about 3% per year through that whole period of time. And so what we've come to know and love in this country is that if you want to have economic expansion, well, guess what? We've always had energy expansion along with that, and in particular, liquid fuel. So here's the thing. We first drilled a well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, 1859, and since then we've been using oil. So a lot of people think, oh, yeah, we've been using oil like 150 years now. But in fact, we've been using more and more and more of it every year as we go forward. So here's an interesting statistic. Half of all the oil ever burned in the world, half ever burned through all of history, has been burned in the last 22 years. And that's the sort of world that we've come to know and love, where we've always been able to have more and more and more of this oil available to us. And that is what I'm saying is no longer going to be possible to us. And yes, the news is full these days of the Bakken find, of the Eagleford plays, of these tight oil plays, the shale oil plays. And those are wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I've visited several of these sites. I love the technology. I just can't even believe how masterful these drill crews are and what they can do. Extraordinary. But the average well coming out of the Bakken play returns 150 barrels per day. And we consume about 18 million barrels per day right now. And so if you say what we're going to do is drill enough wells to become totally energy independent, like some articles have claimed, it's just not possible. We don't. There's not enough drill rigs. There's not enough time. There's actually not enough of the shale plays there to get us to a point where we could put in enough 150 barrel per day rigs, wells, in order to create for ourselves essentially. We have to come up with close to 9 million barrels per day of production. These are hundreds of thousands of wells. Not possible. So what we're going to have to do instead is really start to wrap our arms around the idea that the days of cheap and easy oil are over in general. The second thing we have to look at is that oil is a worldwide commodity. We can have as much or as little as we want in this country, but as long as we are insufficient, we are then beholden to whatever we have to pay on the open world market to get our oil, just like everybody else. Little known fact, China and Asia right now, if you combine them as a region, consumes more oil than either Western Europe or the United States. And so does the rest of the developing world. You take all the other countries, Brazil and all of the South American countries and things like that, and they actually consume more. And they're growing their consumption like crazy. China's now the number one car market. It beats the U.S. by a long shot. We're going to sell, I think, 14.5 million cars this year. China's going to sell 18 million. They've just totally overtaken us as the number one car market. They are absolutely voraciously hungry for oil. And yes, we can drill as many 150 barrel a day wells as we want, but when we're looking at worldwide demand by these developed and developing countries galloping forward at millions of barrels per day per year, there's just an extraordinary gap there between what we're capable of doing and what the world can deliver. If you're on the world stage and you want to buy a barrel of oil, what does it cost you? It's around $110 right now. that tells you where we are. With the economy this week, there's no reason that oil, if we had plenty of it, shouldn't be at $30 or $40 a barrel.
Thanks for watching Part 1. Don't miss Part 2. Thanks for watching.